morning, dear distinguished guests. I would like to thank for all your participation, and it's a great pleasure for us to host you in this seminar. Today, we are here with the second of the series of faculty development series. Our presenter is Professor Dr. Teresa Franklin, who is our Fulbright specialist. Her speech today is about transforming pedagogy. Specifically speaking, she will focus on active learning strategies in programs. And before her presentation, let me introduce Dr. Teresa Franklin. She is a professor emerita educational studies, instructional technology in the Patton College of Education, Ohio University, Athens in Ohio. She has a passion for teaching and learning through the integration of technology into curriculum and instruction that spans 40 years. Research interests include program evaluation and accreditation, curriculum design, examination of online learning environments, mobile technologies, virtual learning environments, and game development for digital learning. Dr. Teresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's nice Monday morning, so we're all up and ready to go, I'm sure. Today, we're going to talk about changing and transforming learning. And I'm going to provide you with some active learning strategies that can be quickly done in your class, as well as some larger active learning strategies that encompass maybe 3 or 4 days or a week or a month even, possibly the whole semester, depending on how you structure them. So we're going to talk about these different active learning strategies as a way to think about quality within our classroom and how we can improve our own teaching quality so that we have student learning and meeting those learning outcomes. So today we're going to understand the interconnection of student learning, hopefully, articulate issues surrounding changing learning methods and faculty instructional strategies, identify 4 learning environments for active learning, participate in the use of CATs, and articulate how instructional strategies and quality assurance improve student achievement. And that's the really big piece. It's about instructional strategies and their impact on student learning and student achievement, and therefore the use of having those indicators as quality assurance within your classroom. So again, quality assurance only comes when you have planning and execution and self-reflection. And so that's the big part of quality assurance and the big part of what faculty, which in my terminology, which I'll talk about a little bit here, faculty are your academic staff, or sometimes in some institutions, they're called teachers. But one of the things that I've noticed that when we talk about quality assurance, we don't really talk about active learning in the classrooms. We have indicators within the TEC rubric that look at teaching and learning, but they don't really discuss active learning within the classroom in much detail. And really, quality assurance in your classroom comes from this teaching and learning practice together. And so I feel like that sometimes when we talk about quality assurance, we actually forget that quality assurance really starts in your classrooms with what you as the academic staff are teaching and what learning outcomes you have that the students are demonstrating. And so those things can go well with active learning. We know that active learning improves learning within our classroom settings. And so that's where I want to focus today. So I've got some definitions for you because sometimes I talk about things a little bit differently from the way they may relate here in Turkey, but PLOs are program learning outcomes. These are the large learning outcomes that are programmed. When a student graduates from that program, the student should know and be able to do, and they should be able to demonstrate. We call them knowledge, skills, and attitudes. CLOs, of course, are your course learning outcomes. Again, these are the things in your courses that students should know and be able to do. And sometimes when we're just generally talking about learning outcomes, we call them SLO, student learning outcomes, that indicate an expected learning in an institution, a program, or a course. So that's a more general term when you're talking about them. And I know that these 3 terms sometimes cause confusion. So PLOs are programs, CLOs are courses, SLOs are the general idea of learning outcomes within an institution, program, or course. Today, when I'm talking, I will use the term academic staff and faculty as interchangeable. In the US, we call our academic staff faculty, whereas here you call faculty as a college. And so I'm going to use them interchangeably to talk about academic staff. I will try to remember to use the term academic staff. Teachers in this presentation are K-12 people. They are the people who teach in the P-12 environment, grades kindergarten through our preschool through 12. Faculties are colleges in my world. So College of Education might be called the Faculty of Education. HED stands for higher education. And so when you see HED, I'm talking about higher education in general. And then teaching is really the instruction of a group of learners in a course or a classroom, a co-op, an internship. Teaching involves all the methods and instructional practices that we might have in one of those locations. Okay, so I had three terms that came up in some discussions that I've had with the academic staff and also with the administrators. And so I kind of wanted to talk about these very quickly, just so that we have kind of a reference point. And I call it which is which, and why are we talking about this? Mainly because these are three terms that people get confused with. And the really important part to remember about is you might use all three of these in a single class setting, or you might use one or another. But pedagogy is typically what we talk about, the art and science and profession of teaching. It's method and practice of teaching, typically at the academic subject level or theoretical concept. So Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences would be an example of pedagogy. But we're beginning to kind of streamline pedagogy into whether it is more teacher-centered and more directed learning. So this might be, so we've moved to pedagogy being the art and science and profession of teaching to actually talking about it as a more teacher-centered sort of learning. Andragogy is often what we use when we talk about adult learning. So people who might be returning to the institution to retool, to gain new skills, we often refer to that method and practice of teaching adults as andragogy. So it's more learner-centered and learner-directed. Then we have heutagogy, which I actually hopefully helped you pronounce down at the bottom. But this is kind of a self-determined learning in which it's self-directed environment that's really students define their own learning path. What happens is in the real world of the classroom is we have a combination of all of these. You have to at some point be teacher-centered because you are giving content or producing content or providing content to learners who may not have ever heard of that content. At that point, you have to be more teacher-centered and more directed in your learning. Andragogy, if you have really level 4 students and graduate students, these are more adult learners. They are moving more toward adulthood and moving into employment. You may have people returning to your institution to get retooled. These are when you would use a more andragogical pathway for teaching. And then the bottom one, heutagogy, is when you actually allow the student to determine what they're going to learn, when they're going to learn it, and how they're going to learn it. So it's more self-directed. We call that me-directed. I direct how this is going to happen. So again, depending if you're using problem-based learning or project-based learning, you may actually implement that strategy. So I wanted just to be sure that we're kind of on the same page of these and how these are typically looked at within the world of teaching and learning. So I did provide you if each one happy in this center of the process of teaching and learning. And that's really when you know you're using one or the other. But I doubt seriously that in reality, we spend a whole lot of time thinking about this, but I was asked to actually clarify this. So let's talk about faculty. So typically when faculty come into a classroom, they build upon the context or their field of information. They then model that often what's in the text that the student has in their possession. They provide some sort of guided practice and then an assignment that becomes independent construction. So this is kind of the cycle that we do in our classroom every time we meet with our students. But there's some underlying issues that have to do with this sort of practice. And we're going to talk about those as we talk about active learning strategies. So first of all, we typically as faculty are taught to create a syllabus, probably because someone gave you one and said, do it like this. You may have a textbook that gives you a syllabus, test, exercises, and the whole bit. You may not even have to put much effort into it. But most of us actually follow the direction of an older faculty member, because part of when you're a brand new faculty member is you want to be accepted. You want to be part of the group. And so you need to get tenure. And so you want to be part of that group. You want to be recognized as competent. And so you use the direction that another faculty member may give you. Now, this faculty member may or may not be an accomplished educator. It could be that this faculty member has been doing the same thing since they started as a brand new faculty member. So that's one of our underlying issues. Another issue is that universities say, and often, that they want us to improve our teaching. They want us to improve the strategies we use in our classroom, but they themselves are not providing the workshops that are needed. They're not requiring or making you responsible for attending these workshops so that you do improve your practice of teaching and learning. And importantly, they often don't give you the time to do that. And so time becomes a big issue of how we're going to have continuous improvement in our classroom in teaching and learning if we don't have time to attend workshops or attend opportunities that would help us improve our practice. We want to do this plan, do, check, act process as educators because we know that these kind of cycles work with learning and teaching, but we don't have the time, nor have we been given the opportunities to do those kinds of things. And the university needs to realize that this is not something that happens overnight, that what happens is our faculty members attend these workshops, they try out a little bit of the workshop, and if that's successful, they try out a little bit more. And then if that's successful, then maybe they try the whole cycle of that planning, plan, do, check, act of that instructional strategy. And so it's a really interesting process that has to go hand in hand with our academic staff and the administrative staff, understanding that faculty have to have time and they have to have a means for improving their practice of teaching and learning. And that's a really important partnership that goes on within an institution. Typically, within your program, you're going to have a mission that is more holistic about what the graduate's going to look like when they leave the institution. You probably are going to have goals that are broad statements about knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are expected in the program. You're going to have objectives, and this is where the confusion often arises too as we develop syllabi. And that is, objectives are what the academic staff is going to do, the intended instructional strategies or learning opportunities that the academic staff is going to provide to students. The outcomes are really what we call the operational definitions. These are the things that students should know, be able to do, and demonstrate when they leave the course and when they leave the program. And so these are the things that are learner-centered. Now you'll notice that I'm not using the term student-centered, which is often also used in this case. Whichever one you prefer. We typically in the US have moved to the learner-centered kind of talk, mainly to show that the learner, no matter whether they are just entering the college or they are a level four about to graduate, or they're a returning learner, that they are part of this, what needs to be known and what is able to do and what is demonstrated. That learners are the center of what we do in our classrooms, those learning outcomes are really important so that we can meet program learning outcomes of what the graduate should know and be able to do and look like when he or she graduates. So another issue is, how are we going to create this instructional change in our learning? So we have to determine, and this is one of the things your teaching and learning center could do, is they could determine what it is that faculty on this campus need to learn through a very short survey typically, or maybe they just send out a statement that says, you know, if you had to pick 3 things that you would like to improve in your instruction, what would they be? So one way that you can begin this process of figuring out instructional change is to know what faculty, academic staff really need to learn. And then where would they get this information and what tools are they going to need in order to obtain or acquire this information? So if your teaching and learning center sends out something that says, what would you like to know and be able to do as a faculty member? And the faculty member writes down, I want to be able to use a blog in order to have students talk to one another outside of class time, but to talk on a certain topic that I am giving them. And I want the blog to be secure so that other people can't jump in from somewhere else and talk on this blog. Then that would be something that your teaching and learning center could help you learn to do as a faculty member. But they would need to know, one, that you want to learn how to use a blog, and then also if you have a certain tool, technology tool in mind that would be used, because if you don't, then they need to help you find that as well. So instructional change on a campus actually requires that teaching and learning centers stay in constant contact with faculty and ask them, you know, how are you doing at this point in the semester? Are you ready to learn something else? What would you like to learn over the summer? So that is how we work to create instructional change. So what happens though, most of the time, is that faculty don't learn about advanced pedagogies or advanced active learning strategies because they really like to teach the way they were taught. It's a habit, it's easy, it's, you know, you can do it very easily. It doesn't require that you get out of your comfort zone. So change is hard. Change requires that we move beyond our comfort zone. And we have lots of research to back up that this is what happens with faculty, that we teach the way we were taught. So in order to improve instructional strategies, we have to work on our teaching assistants, our graduate assistants, and ourselves so that all of us will change this pedagogy over time to an active learning strategy. So quality really comes from the faculty. And so as much as you may have learning outcomes or curriculum matrices or even assessments, you still have to be a quality faculty and you have to work on your teaching and teaching strategies in order to have quality within the institution. Now, kind of to piggyback on that, we also have to learn how or understand how student learning occurs. So the first part is when you're developing your syllabus, you need to think about, what do students need to know? What do they need to understand? What do they need to be able to do? And they have to do this within 14 weeks. Now, if you think about a 14-week semester, you've got a day that you're going to miss for the midterm. You may have a day you're going to miss for projects to be presented in class if you're doing project-based learning. You may have a second or third test that you give as an assessment. So you have to really sit down with a calendar and think about when these days occur and how many days do you actually have to teach. Because one of the things that we're all very bad at doing is taking things out of our curriculum for that course. Sometimes we try to just push as much information at the students instead of really thinking about, this is my course. What is it that the students need to know, understand, and be able to do? And then the next thing is, how do we teach effectively to ensure that all students are learning? Not just the brightest students are learning, but that all students are learning. And then how do we know they are learning? So what kind of assessments are we going to use to determine if they're learning? And from that, what do we do when students are not learning or not reaching mastery as expected? What are you going to do about that? So when you think about your students' learning and you build out that topic list on your syllabus every semester, you really need to think about these 4 questions. So I want you to take a moment, and I want you to go to the chat box, and I want you to tell me which of these questions, 1, 2, 3, or 4, starting with what do students need to know is number 1, how do we teach effectively is number 2, how do we know students are learning 3, and what do we know when students are not learning? Which one is the most difficult for you as a faculty member? So when you look at these, which one, how would you answer each one of these, but which one is the most difficult for you? Well, it looks like from what we have here, well, let's see. Now, when you are doing online work and you stop to have students answer a question, have your learners answer a question, then you probably want to count to 8 seconds at least, because that's how long it takes them just to get to the point where they can begin to input information. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It's the same thing as what we do in our classrooms, of pausing to give everyone time to understand the question that's been asked, and then how would they respond to that question as well. And then of course we have people who don't want to respond because they don't want to be embarrassed, or they're afraid that, you know, it would be embarrassing for them or whatever. So in this particular case, it looks like how we teach is how do we teach effectively to ensure all students are learning is probably the one that we worry the most about. So maybe today, as we're working through this presentation, that is one that I am actually concentrating on. So hopefully you'll have some answers by the end. So stay with us and let's see what happens next. One of the things I wanted to share with you, if you have not seen this in some opportunity of some of your professional development, is what we call the triangle of success. And when you look at a student as a holistic being in your classroom, and they're in there to learn content about knowledge and skills and attitudes, then this is what we call the triangle of success. These are all things that they need to know and be able to do. If you look down at knowledge, that's the easy one, because it's your content, your theories, your information, all your facts, figures, and so forth. And learning sciences, the mathematics, whatever. The two on the side, the skills and the attitudes, these are the ones that are a little more difficult. And these are sometimes often referred to, especially on the skill side, as the 21st century skills. Managing their time. Students come to your institution probably with poor time management skills. We find that to be the case for many learners. Critical thinking. They need to be able to, take a problem, deconstruct it, determine what might be possible solutions, and reconstruct to the solutions. Reasoning, interpersonal skills, communications, teamwork, goal setting. These are all skills that when they leave at graduation, they should have in hand to work within the employment arena that they're going to enter. The other thing they need to know are attitudes, because one of the things we hear in the US about our graduates as they leave the institution is they know everything. We're happy about their knowledge. You guys did a great job teaching them. You even talked a little bit about communication. You got them so they could write emails properly. They have good interpersonal skills and things of that nature, but they really need self-motivation. They need self-confidence, optimism, commitment to the organization, enthusiasm, cooperation. All of these things, which are really attitudes, are another piece of what you as an academic staff have to think about when you're talking about your content information. What are the attitudes that go with that that will need to go out with that student as they go into employment. So where do knowledge, skills, and attitudes come from? Of course, they're the general versus the discipline specific. You have NQFs that talk about your 21st century skills. And then you have MUDEC and FEDEC and other accrediting agencies, as well as program reviews or program decisions that really decide what the discipline specific content is. We also have best practices, and we have professional societies from the field that help us determine what should be taught in our classrooms. We engage with other faculty around your country, and possibly you may even have faculty that you talk to internationally that you say, what's going on? And then we have stakeholders such as students that have left the institution, we have alumni, we have employers. All of these help us talk about what knowledge, skills, and attitudes are needed in our courses. We also have Bloom's Taxonomy. Bloom Taxonomy, I'm sure you guys have been working on learning outcomes from what I can see. So you have program learning outcomes and course learning outcomes, and you have used the Bloom's Taxonomy for this. Realize that Bloom has actually 3 parts. It's not just cognitive. It also has psychomotor, which looks at imitation, precision, manipulation, the ability to articulate a concept or an idea. We also have the affective domain, which has to do with valuing and organization and respond to phenomenon or receiving phenomenon. And so these other parts of Bloom's taxonomy might be important parts of your learning outcomes as well. Today, I'm going to focus on these 2 things, focus on learning and understanding student experiences. And then Friday, I'm going to talk about curriculum. So I'm going to do a little bit more on program improvement, talk about curricular design, and then some assessment and feedback techniques that you might use. So to think about active learning, let's check these 4 out that we're going to talk about today. First thing I'm going to talk about are CATs. These are classroom assessment techniques. Then I'm going to talk about problem-based learning, then project-based learning, and how the 2 are different because we tend to lump them together and they are not the same. And then I'm going to talk about the 5E learning cycle, which actually can be used in any classroom for helping students organize themselves. So these 4 implemented in your classroom really will improve your curriculum design and promote a more learning-centered area of learning in the classroom. So they really are learner-centered, and they also provide feedback. All of these have a feedback loop in them. And so that is one of the ways in which you can actually bring active learning into your class in a greater depth. So let's talk about CATs, classroom assessment techniques. Now, I have a handout that is not part of this whole thing because I didn't think you wanted to go through every one of these. But if you will email me, I will send you this as a Word document. It's called Classroom Assessment Activities Techniques. And in part 1, it is a guide for faculty and teaching assistants. And in part 2, it's CATs with descriptions and strategies. But just remember, this is called CATs, you know, the things that go meow for your classroom. So classroom assessment techniques are typically ungraded activities. There are some faculty that I have known that grade them, but typically they are ungraded. The purpose is to provide instructor feedback. And anytime you have an opportunity, because many of us teach large classes of 100 or more students, or even if you're at 45 or 50, that's plenty of students, you don't get a chance to actually provide feedback to every single student, and often, except whenever they turn in an assignment or they come to you after class about an assignment or a grade that they received. And so these CATs can provide instructor feedback, and they assure the student that the instructor is really taking a genuine active interest in their learning. So this is one of the ways that you can become more effective and more efficient about helping students learn is by using this classroom assessment technique. So they provide feedback about student learning, especially on heavy weighted assignments. They can be used to be sure that the student is understanding what it is they're supposed to be doing and learning. It can model ongoing and evolving process So you may have a very difficult concept that you're trying to teach over a week or a week and a half period or 2-week period. And you may use these CATs to kind of guide you on where you are in your instruction so that you can make sure that students are indeed effectively learning the material. It also works for the student to gauge their own learning practice. And so they get a chance to reflect on their own learning so that they themselves can begin to calibrate where they are with the rest of the other students. Lots of times, what I've found over the years of teaching is that students believe they know more than they know. And so this can be used to help them gauge what they actually know and what your expectation is for what they know. It also helps them feel less anonymous in a large class. And it gives you some food for thought because often within their answers, they, in a sense, tell you about your own teaching. So it gives you a chance to reflect on your teaching as well. And we know from research that reflective practitioners, reflective academic staff and faculty are much better at teaching than those who do not do reflective practice. So being a reflective educator is a really important part of how you become a better practitioner in the classroom. So these are my favorite 4. So I'm going to show them to you first. The first one is a minute paper. During the last few minutes of the class period, I asked students to give me on a half a sheet of paper or an index card. I have tons of index cards or paper that's being thrown away because people didn't print correctly. I cut it up into pieces and I give it one to every student when they come in or they just pick it up. And I ask them, what was the most important thing you learned today? What point is not very clear now? So those might be the 2 questions that I ask them, or maybe I just ask one of them. And this is what we call really low prep, because you can just have the question on a PowerPoint slide, or you can write it on the board or whatever. So, or even just say it out loud. Okay, you take out the little sheet of paper I gave you that as you came in the door, tell me what was the most important point you learned today. Then I take them all up. They put them, actually I have a chair that sits at the door. They put them on the chair as they leave, and I pick them all up and I quickly go through them to see kind of, is there category, more things about this, more things about this topic, more things about that topic, or maybe they all say, I got it. And if they all say I got it, then usually that means nobody got it. But I go back and I remind them of some key points the next day. But the next time I meet with the class, I quickly go through and say, well, you know, I got this in the point. This was a really important point. I agree with you that this was a really important point, and to expand on that for just a few minutes at the very first of the class. It helps bring them back into the learning process from when they left you last time, because often there'll be a weekend between when you meet a class, or we meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday. So there's always time between each class meeting. So that brings them psychologically back into your class and into the fold of what you're teaching. My second favorite is the muddiest point. So what was the muddiest point in the lecture, the discussion, your homework assignment, the video? And this muddiest point means unclear. What was unclear? So I asked them, I have the same little pieces of paper, and I just asked them to jot down a quick response to that question. These things take about 3 to 5 minutes to do. By the time they get their paper out, write down the question and leave. And I always do it typically as they're leaving, unless I have a particularly long class, because some of the classes I teach are 4 hours long. And so in that case, I might do it at a break. Application cards. Let's suppose I'm talking about to first-year biology students mitosis. I might say to them, okay, we talked about that today. How would that have a real-world application? What would we do with that idea, with that theory, with that concept? And again, they're to jot it down, put it on the chair as they leave. And what I find out is sometimes, you know, they didn't get it. And so it gives me a chance to also see that, can they connect what I'm teaching to the real world? Because we want this to leave the classroom and go out into the real world, and then for them to be able to implement. And so how do they get the connection between this theory, this principle, this concept that I'm teaching in the real world? Then we have my last favorite one, which is the one sentence summary, which is really easy. You know, who did what, to whom, when, where, what, and how. It's really just summarize what you learned today in one sentence. Sometimes I get really long sentences, but it makes them stop and regroup, rethink through what they did that day and write it down. And typically they learn over time because I will say, well, you know, you need to be sure to tell me the essential concepts. You know, just don't tell me you learned a lot today or this was a good class. What I want to know is what was the concept? And that makes them do recall in the learning. And so all of these are really quick 5-minute things that you can do. The one sentence summary is a little more difficult because you have more analysis that you have to do with it, but the other are very quick. And so they can easily be done in a classroom. These 4 require a little more time. One is a memory matrix in which you put down different concepts and topics that you taught in cells down, I use a spreadsheet, but I print it out or a Word document with a table. And I put the information or concepts that I've taught. And then in across from it, in the boxes that are across from the concept, there's an empty box that says, you know, what did you learn from this? How would you use this? Tell me something about this information that you learned today, and trying to get them to connect in their own way to what is going on. What I find from the memory matrix is misconceptions. Some of the best misconceptions can be found by using a memory matrix on what is being learned. Exam evaluations, I often use a question at the end to, and I say, what question did I not ask you for this exam that you thought I would? It's really interesting to see the different things because this is something they studied for and then I didn't ask about it. And so they always are happy to put down, well, I studied for this and here's the answer to that question. So they have to put the question down and they have to write their answer. Sometimes I use it if I'm having they're in a particularly difficult concept that they're working on. I may use it as like an extra credit of 1 or 2 points. And it seems that they always pick questions that are actually more difficult than the ones I ask. So that's kind of fun to see these other kind of questions. I've even actually used some of them on tests later on. Chain notes, in this one, prep and low analysis, it does take some time. I have an envelope, I pass it around, and what happens is that you, as a student, write one question you're still worried about or one question you don't get, and you put that question inside the envelope. I take the envelope at the end after everybody's passed them in. I look through them and say, oh, well, this one needs to be clarified more. I need to tell the students about this. This seems like it might be a misconception. Let me go over that again. And then the last one that I've got on these examples, there are lots of these, what we call CATs, is direct paraphrasing. And then in this particular one, and this one's great for engineers, to be honest. I use this in an engineering education course that I worked on with an engineering professor at Ohio University. And that is direct paraphrasing, because we find that engineers use terms and things that often the layperson does not understand. And so in this particular one, I ask for direct paraphrasing of a concept. So translate what you just learned into something that the average person who was not an engineer, not a scientist, or not a technology person, is going to be able to understand. You would be surprised how hard this is for students. And so these 8 are kind of my ones I find that are easiest to use and to quickly get in and out of a classroom, but there are many more. And as I said, if you will email me, I'll send you a list that tells you exactly how to do them. So tips on implementation. First of all, find one of these that fits your style, how you teach, and realize that you have classroom time limits. So, you know, pick one that'll fit in your classroom time limit and also fit your teaching style. Second, conduct one CAT ahead of time to help students understand what you're going to do. So usually after I finish explaining the syllabus, I use what's the muddiest point? What's the one thing you still don't understand about the syllabus? And so then they see how the process works. And I say to them, I'm going to be doing these throughout the semester. And so this is how it works. I will ask you to write down the one thing you still don't understand. I may ask you what you learned today, whatever. But when I say I'm going to do a CAT, this is what I'm talking about. You don't need to do one every time you meet class. That's a misnomer. A lot of people believe that you have to do them all the time. You don't. You want to do them really at important points in what you're teaching so that you can see that if your teaching is effective, are you connecting with your learner on the things that you believe they need to know and be able to do? Can they tell you that? And always explain the purpose of this CAT when you're going to do it so that the students know exactly why they are doing what they're doing. And then always report what you found out. So when you do the CAT at the end of the class, the next time you meet the class, you need to report out to them and say, here's what when I took this up and I read them, here's the things I found out about. Here's what I need to reteach. These are the things that you seem to have questions about, and it's 70% of you. So really report out your findings to the student. Excuse me there. So the first thing I want to move on from CATs is to problem-based learning. Now, problem-based learning and project-based learning are often used as the one and same, but they are not. You will notice that they have the same steps, and that's why there's the confusion. Problem-based learning is really about using a large topic, let's say climate change, because that's one we all know about, and you ask the students to determine the parts of that particular topic, that large, broad topic that they're going to work on and present and go through this cycle with. So you ask them to create a driving question from that topic. You ask them to list what it is they will need to know. Where is it they're going to look for research? Then they might inquire with people outside the university, with other people who would know about this, what kind of innovation is going on with that particular topic. 21st century skills would be involved. That is, they need to communicate with people, write this all up, present it as their own voice of how they would solve this particular problem. They're going to get feedback and revise from you. And then typically in problem-based learning, you would have it publicly presented product. On the other side, project-based learning is really scenario-based. I, as the faculty member, typically would give the student the driving question or challenge. They would then go through the same kind of process, but the faculty member or the academic staff is going to be more involved in this process of what's determined and the pathway they're going to follow than in a project-based learning. In project-based learning, it's really more student-driven, even though both of them are student-driven. The project-based learning one is more student-driven. So let's take a look at them. First of all, we teach traditionally, we tell the students what they need to know, we tell them to memorize or remember it, and then we give them an assignment to show how it's used. When you teach with PBL, problem-based learning, you actually ask the student to identify a problem that is within the realm of that topic. You ask students to identify what they know about the problem before they start, and then you put them with others in teams to learn about the problem and to solve the problem. So it's a very different paradigm. We use it because it is a learner-centered approach in which students learn about a subject by working in groups. So I'm not giving the information because even though they don't know about that information, I'm actually asking them to do discovery of that information. All I do is really oversee, facilitate what's going on, and try to make sure they continue to head in the right direction. The problem that they provide, the student creates, from the large topic that I as a faculty member would give them drives the motivation and the learning. And rather than me teaching the relevant material, I actually ask the problem to be presented and then for the student to tell me what they believe the relevant material would be. So it's very much about student voice and student control and them really being the center of the learning. And these can be things that happen very short, maybe 2 or 3 class meetings, or it could be something that you do for an entire semester. Most often it is done as a group-oriented project. So you've got the groups there together working on this big idea, this question or problem that they have presented out of your topic, and they're going to work as a team to present a product from that work. The great thing about PBL is that it really applies your 21st century skills. It requires that they explain concepts, they have to work in teams, they have to use written and oral communication. One of the things that happens in the project, in the problem-based learning in my class is they often have to, I make them contact 2 or 3 resources outside the university, and one of them has to be international. So that means they have to contact people that they don't know, explain what they're trying to do, and then get feedback or get information from those people. So they have an opportunity to actually speak with people who are well-known scientists or technicians or engineers within the field. And so this gives them that oral and written communication practice of working with people who are outside their typical communication group. It really helps them with self-awareness and also the evaluation of working in a group, because when it's over, I have them actually evaluate the group. How did Bill do? How did Julie do? How did Sandy do? And so they evaluate each other. And so it makes them pay attention to the rubric that I've developed for evaluating their partners throughout the process. They work independently as well as with a team. So that requires critical thinking and analysis. So typically in this step process, they define the problem, explore what they already know, determine what they need to know and how they're going to acquire that information, the tools they'll need to use, evaluate ways to solve the problem, then they present a solution and they report their finding. And this is the assessment, and this is the part that you need to collect data on for your quality assurance. How many people scored a 5 on the rubric on each part? How many people were not able to complete this? How many people, what were the kinds of scores you had on written communication? There are ways to assess each of these parts within problem-based learning. This is a rubric that can be used for problem-based learning assignments. I can also send you this as a full document if you're interested. It is a 4-to-1 rubric. You'll notice that they have to recognize the problem. They have to talk about the organization and structure. I'm going to be looking, did they understand the topic? Did they provide me with a solid argument that was clear and accurate and thorough? And did they have a counter argument? Because it's not just that I want you to argue for something. I want you to tell me what the people who don't agree with you are saying as well. So what is the counter argument? And then what are the learning outcomes? Did they meet their learning outcomes for that particular project? Again, this is where you get your data that shows that the students are effectively learning in your classroom. Again, this is another rubric in which it tells about the task, the process, the self-regulation and praise. And you'll notice that it gives you an opportunity to see what the definition is, how you're going to give feedback to the student, how the student views this process and the questions they should be asking themselves, and then how you as the faculty member, administrative staff, or academic staff are viewing this as well. The funny thing that always comes out of this rubric is that students know they did well Can you see the PowerPoint?
No.
Okay, let me see. Okay, let me see if I can share the screen again. Are we seeing now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Somehow or another, the connection lost. Oh, well, let's move on. The difference between the two is that problem-based learning, the students are completely problem-based. They create the question and work toward the answer. Checking in with the faculty member to see if they're on the right track, but really it's very learner-centered. And then project-based, the faculty member sets the goals of the projects in place as the project begins. So those are the two big differences. They go through the same cycles, but there's a difference in how the project actually starts. Project-based learning is a category of experiential learning. And after you go through this process, you may have multiple potential solutions, but typically in project-based, most faculty members that I've worked with who work with project-based learning try to pick a problem that they kind of knew where the answer was going to go. And so that's another piece of this that happens in this particular model. There are 4 motivators: fostering work readiness, facilitating service, fostering critical thinking, and understanding of content. The final one is inquiry-based learning. Again, this is another one in which students develop questions, they develop a problem statement, and then research. But what I wanted to show you is really that this is open inquiry that has really 5 parts, where you engage the learner explores the topic, they explain the topic, and they elaborate on the topic. And you can use it in very complex situations, in problem situations, in decision situations, and implementation situations. So if you look at each one of these strategies across here, again, it tells you how it works. For example, in the complex, you're going to see the issues, clarify the issues, assess the priority, and name the steps in solving it. With a problem, you would focus the problem, identify what it is and not, and narrow the possibility causes, and then determine the true cause. Decision, you'll state the decision, establish and clarify objectives, list alternatives, evaluate those alternatives, consider the risk, and then trust your work, that you have thoroughly looked through all the decisions. And then finally, you'll predict in the implementation situation, you'll predict potential problems, list the likely causes, agree on a preventative action, and note contingent actions. So in this model, you have a chance to engage the learner, where the learner calls up prior knowledge, and the academic staff poses the problem and asks the questions, reveals discrepancies as they go through the process, and assesses prior knowledge. Then we have the exploration, where the learner gathers and organizes, interprets, analyzes, and evaluates data. This one is more often used in science, where you have a lot of data that needs to be analyzed. So you have a hypothesis and a prediction. You explore the resources, design and the plan, collect data, build models, seek possibilities, self-reflect, and evaluate. And then on the next column is what the academic staff does. It questions and probes, models when needed, makes open suggestions, provides resources, provides feedbacks, and assess understanding and processes. In the next, explain, the learner clarifies understanding, discovers, and reaches a conclusion or generalization. And so this is all about the learner actually clarifying what they understand about the problem, what they found out about it, and sharing that information, and checking to see if it's really plausible. If not, they may have to seek a new explanation. And again, the academic staff is being the facilitator, providing feedback, asking questions, providing models, providing resources. In elaborate, the learner applies the conclusions or generalizations to solve problems, make decisions, perform tasks, resolve conflicts, and make meaning. So this is the point at which they come to their conclusion and they say, well, I now know this. Is this really going to solve the problem? How am I going to carry out the solution to this project? And they may need to seek further clarification. Once again, the academic staff is acting as a facilitator, questions, feedback, resources, models, and evaluates. And finally, in the evaluation state, the learner is evaluated. That is, the academic staff actually evaluates what they have learned through formative and summative assessment. And so the formative, the learner has solved the problem, reflects on the assessment, hands-on assessment, pictorial, maybe they provide pictorial assessment, what new knowledge they found, asks new questions, seeks further clarification. The summative would be a standardized test, maybe a unit test, a chapter test, a quiz. All the time, the academic staff is in the formative part, asking questions, providing feedback, and evaluating to see if indeed the learner is solving the problem that they decided was their problem they were going to solve, and also making sure that they are part of that process of steering the learner in the correct path. Again, it gives you situational appraisement, decision analysis, problem analysis, and potential problem analysis, such as tools that might be used. So finally, students can offer explanations on previous knowledge and new knowledge. They can investigate their own questions. They get to sort out information, decide which of the information is important because they themselves are gathering that information. And they should be willing to revise explanations and consider new ideas if they find out their solution does not work. And that's the hard part, when they've gone this far and then they suddenly realize it's not going to work. They have to really start the process over again. So they critique their own learning, they report and celebrate their strengths, and they reflect with adults and their peers. Each active learning activity has data embedded in it. So when you give this sort of assignment or do this sort of assignment, problem-based learning, project-based learning, using the 5E learning cycle, you will get data that you can then use to show that you have met, the students have met the program learning outcomes and the course learning outcomes. And that's a very important part of what you do in your classroom, is making sure that you have met your program and course learning outcomes. So to kind of bring it all together at the end, we have these active learning strategies that we can use in the classroom, but it all goes back to our academic staff and faculty members. Faculties need mentors to help them use these different means, and they need mentors that come often into their classrooms to help them. They need help from support administration, like the teaching and learning centers. And those three of them, the faculty member, the mentor, and the learning center, need to meet together to help get the process going. Typically, you have a 2-year curriculum review that examines your curriculum, the syllabi, the data, the projects, the class that you've done, the assignments, assessment, and testing. And in that process, the mentor and the administration, the teaching and learning center, should be together with the faculty member to help them work through that information. And most importantly, faculty need time if they're going to actually implement these processes. So the road to quality, because we've talked a lot about quality while we're here, is really the focus on the pedagogy. Which are you using? When are you using it? Understanding the student experiences of how they learn, when they learn, informing program improvement, embed curricular design, and provide feedback. The first two today we really talked about were focusing on active learning pedagogies and understanding student experiences. And as I said, on Friday, we'll get the other three. So at this point, we have a plan, do, check, act, in which we identify the problem, test the potential solutions, study the results, and implement the best solution. This is a continuous improvement cycle that you can actually use in your classroom as you begin to develop these new ways of teaching in active learning settings. Sorry about that, my mouse is jogging today. So at this point, I'd like for you to go back to your chat again, and let's talk about, let me see if I can get it back up since I lost it earlier when we went down. What I would like for you to do is to talk about what you think, what's one thing that you learned today as we were going through this process. What is one thing that you learned? We have a saying in the United States: if you go to a conference or you go to a workshop, if you learn one thing, you've had a successful workshop. So what's the one thing you've learned today? Or the one thing that made you go, wow, I need to think about this some more. And maybe this is something I can use. So if you'll put that in the chat box.
We have a reflection from Ramadan. Student-centered learning is the way to go. He just reflects his opinion.
Great.
Okay, we are waiting your response.
So this would be an example of the minute paper. In the last minute of class, I would be asking my students to share what they've learned, share one thing they've learned or the one thing that they want to maybe go back and look at again. So we're acting as the students today to put in your 1 minute paper.
And one more response from Servet Turan, inquiry-based learning, and also from Özgür Ceylan, samples of cats for active learning. And one from Gonca Eren, pedagogy is a new era for our faculties and learners. She just reflects her opinion. Mm-hmm. Also problem and project-based learning. I think so.
Again, here's my email address. If you want a copy of the handout about cats or a copy of this presentation, just email me and let me know. I'll be happy to send it to you. Thanks a lot. And I think we're at 1 minute past the end of our time. So we'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Dr. Teresa, for your contribution and for our participants also. Thank you very much. The session is just finished. We would like to see you in our next meeting. See you. Bye-bye.